Hey folks, quick video today. I think Second Kings, we're kind of right in the middle. And I just want to make a couple comments about there's a lot of kings right here in these two places. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of these kings. What made them good, what made them not so good in the assessment of the author of First and Second Kings. We'll talk about that a little bit. I also want to make a couple of comments about anointing and something that relates to a couple of weeks ago. A lot of Christians celebrated Palm Sunday and the triumphal entry. And so there's a piece of background here too that helps us with that. So we're looking at chapters 9 through 12 today, Second Kings. Jehu in chapter 9 is king of Israel. And he's one of the good ones. There aren't a lot of good ones. Remember, after Solomon, the kingdom broke in two, the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah. And these books of First and Second Kings, primarily Second Kings, because that's where most of it's the divided monarchy, remember it's called. And we see kind of interspersed the two different, the kings of the two different areas that kind of go back and forth here. Jehu in chapter 9 is somebody, one of the prophets is sent by Elisha. Elisha's still here. He dies in chapter 13. That's, I think, tomorrow's reading. Elisha does not go out like Elijah in the sort of God taking him. He dies, and the scripture will tell us there that he's buried. So it's not the same. It's not the same deal. So chapter 9, Elisha tells his prophet, tuck in your cloak. I think the old school King James is gird up your loins. They would do this with their what they would wear. They kind of had a way, if they were going to run, if they were going fast, or if they were sometimes going into battle, they would kind of tie up their garment. They didn't have pants back in the day, so they would tie it up for action. So he was going to go. He was going to be in a hurry for this. Take this flask of olive oil and go. So when you have oil, and when you're going on a prophetic task, you're going to do what? You're going to mashach a Mashiach. You're going to anoint a Messiah, an anointed one. And remember, that happened with several of the kings. Most of these kings, we don't hear about this process with. And I don't know if it's just safe to assume that it happened, even though it's not described, or if it didn't. I'm not entirely sure. But we know that this is a significant rite that would happen at least at times. So in verse 6 and of chapter 9 here still, the prophet pours oil on Jehu's head and declares, this is what the Lord of God, the God of Israel, says, I anoint you king over the Lord's people, Israel. So God's still actively engaged in both of these kingdoms. They're still his people collectively, even though they're kind of into a little bit different tracks here. And his commission, part of it is going to be to get rid of the rest of Ahab's house. Ahab, remember, is the super crooked king who has no regard for the Lord. And so his influence seems like needs to be gotten rid of, right? Done away with. So, hey, check this out. In verse 13, so chapter 9, they, the people that were around, quickly took their cloaks and spread them under him on the bare steps. Then they blew the trumpet and shouted, Jehu is king. So here's another piece. We've seen some different pieces together, some clues of the image. Remember with Solomon, when he becomes king, he puts him on David's, his father, David, the king's donkey, right? So that that animal, when we see Jesus come in on it, is representative of King Solomon riding in, right? We see on that when that happens, that triumphal entry coming down off the Mount of Olives into Jerusalem, that people lay down cloaks, palm branches, other things. But we see the cloaks here. So when we read in the Gospels that people are doing that, they're laying out their cloaks, what are we supposed to think of? We're supposed to think of, we have these things in our backgrounds if we're Jewish people, as they were, of course, all of them. This is an act that's done not just for a celebrity or somebody who's important, but for a king, a coming king. And so that tells us something of what people would have thought of who Jesus is. Now, whether they thought more of him or not, that's not for us to discuss in that thing today. But certainly, this idea of kingship, which ties to this word of Messiah. Remember from our other videos of being anointed one, relates oftentimes to kingship. It could apply to priests as well, but most often in the biblical story, it relates to kings. So Jehu is, I'm trying to think about where his story is kind of wrapped up here. Jezebel is killed. Ahab's gone, but Jezebel is still there until this time at the end of chapter 9. She dies, and a prophecy is fulfilled in the midst of that. And Jehu does so in chapter 10. He rounds up all the prophets of Baal. So what makes a king good, and I'll follow up with this a little bit more in a second with another text. What makes the kings good is when they're faithful to God. What makes the kings not good is their degree of unfaithfulness to God, primarily by way of idolatry and idolatrous type practices. That can have extreme forms, it can have lesser forms, but it's all no good. Ahab and Jezebel become the worst because of their just active, enthusiastic promotion of Baal worship. And so part of, getting rid of the descendants of Ahab and Jezebel has to do with rooting out, because a lot of them were the right bloodlines of people, maybe in some ways, but they were promoting these idolatrous practices. So then at the end of, or most of chapter 10, Jehu he kind of tricks them. He says, we're going to have this big Baal party, and everybody get together, get them all in one place, call them all together. We're going to just, really give we're coming back to the heart of Baal worship here. And so he kind of tricks them, right? He gets them all together. And he wants to make sure that it's just them there. Why? Because he's going to kill them. He wants to get rid of these idolatrous worship practices. So he says, I'm in verse 23 of chapter 10, look around and see that no one who serves the Lord is here with you. Let's make sure we're pure in our worship of Baal here. If anybody serves Yahweh, let's get them out of here. We don't want them. We only want pure Baal. So they're probably excited, so they go up to make the sacrifices and burnt offerings, and he has them wiped out, right? And we see this. This is a substantial summary here in verse 28 of chapter 10. So Jehu destroyed Baal worship in Israel. Okay, so that's an upside to him. However, he did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. Now, do you remember what Jeroboam did? It says here, it reminds us if we forget, which he had caused Israel to commit, the worship of the golden calves at Bethel and Dan. Okay. So, there's different forms and degrees maybe of improper worship. Worship of other deities is of course bad, but even worship of God with graven images or in places or ways that are not prescribed is problematic as well too. And so we'll see. I'll hopefully share another couple examples of you as well. So look at verse 30, chapter 10 still. The Lord said to Jehu, because you have done well in accomplishing what is right in my eyes and have done the house of Ahab all I had in mind to do, your descendants will sit on the throne of Israel to the fourth generation. So that's a plus in the perspective of the author of this and in God's voice, of course. Verse 31, yet Jehu was not careful to keep the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. So he does something that's deemed good, but something that's lacking. What is it? He did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam, which he had caused Israel to commit. So nobody wants to seem to do away with these golden calf worship spots, even when they're good in other areas. So Jehu's a good example of kind of a mixed bag. He's not all bad. He's better than a lot of them, a lot better than Ahab, but still not all the way. He doesn't serve God with a wholehearted, which is what David is set to do. Now, David has issues, but David's issues are not idolatry issues. David's in the right camp. He just sometimes is going way off the morals, right? Which is a huge problem. That's not whitewashed. But David, doesn't turn to other gods and those kind of worship practices. So that's substantial. Have you guys picked this up yet? It's repeated very often. In this instance here, I'm in verse 34 of chapter 10. As for the other events of Jehu's reigns, all he did and all his achievements, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? And sometimes mention the annals of the kings of Judah. What is this? They're lost books. We do not have them, but apparently we have an idea of that they spell out these kings' reigns in more details. And so the author here of 2 Kings is saying, hey, if you want to know more about these guys, get these other books. Challenge for us is we don't have the other books. So I don't know all of what's sort of going on there. In chapter 12, a king named Joash, he starts at 7 years old as king, which is pretty young. And he has the substantial project of repairing the temple. It's interesting that the temple would be in such ill repair to need this repair. There's a plan that was initially enacted that didn't quite work, but then they sort of find out something that will work, and they use significant funds to hire professionals to put the temple back into good repair. So mainly I just want you to think today a little bit about the kings. So watch for oftentimes in the pattern of this book, at the end of, sometimes at the beginning, I think, but often at the end of a king's reign will give this assessment. So I just want to turn your attention to what is it that's praised about these kings at times, and what is it when they're criticized, what is it that's criticized? Because I think that's pretty important, really, to understanding the book of 2 Kings. So, okay, I will probably not see you guys. I'm going to be at a conference Monday and Tuesday, so I probably won't see you till midweek next week. Keep on reading. We're in 2 Kings the whole time here. At the end of next week, we're starting in 1 Chronicles, which I'm excited about. I've never really spent a lot of time in 1 and 2 Chronicles, kind of how that's the unique angle that those books bring. But keep on doing the reading in 2 Kings. See what you see the pattern. Just try to get an idea, again, of the big picture and how these kings are assessed. I'll see you guys next week. Hope you have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you soon.